go, and let's hope the rain holds off a little bit. It is starting to drip on us. Well, g'day ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our second week of tutorials for our Chronological Bible in a Year Reading Challenge, joined with a special guest this week. Jesse James, number one son. One thing I thought I'd do this year is time to time in the tutorials introduce people or welcome people who are doing the challenge with you to sort of get that sense and the flow of how you guys are going at home. Jesse's never read through the Bible chronologically before.
First time chronologically, yeah.
All right, so Jesse's new to the challenge, so he's on the same page as you. I thought it'd be good to invite him on in this first week, just find out a couple of things about, well, how are you going so far? Pretty easy so far. You still committed?
Yep, I'm good.
Yeah, okay. How did you...
I'm up to date.
Yeah, well done. Two main things that I want to find out from you to help people. How did you approach the readings? Mm-hmm. So we started Job and started Genesis. How did you do that? And what was your main takeaway from this first week?
Yeah, well, I first started off thinking I was going to do like 20 minutes a day and kind of go by that. Mm-hmm. But Saturday happened. I had plenty of time. So I grabbed my bike, grabbed a camping chair, paper Bible and notebook, and I just went and sat by the beach in beautiful Coffs, and I just read it all, and it was awesome. And I think it meant that the rest of the week I was able to deep dive into research, and that I could learn more. I wasn't just reading every day.
So you literally read it all in one sitting, both. But how long did it take?
I think it took 2 hours. I had no phone, so I don't know, but it was around
Number 2 one rule for reading the Bible: leave your phone at home. That's a great tip. Okay, cool. So you read it all, paper Bible, and then what was your main takeaway? What did you get out of this week?
Well, I then transferred my notes to digital because I'm a tech guy, so you know. But my main takeaway was patterns. So I saw patterns of 7 days. Okay. There was patterns of 40 days of fasting, and there was also patterns of other 40 days.
Noah and the flood.
Yep.
40 days. Yep.
And then I've seen that that's also connected to the 40 years in the desert. People have also made those connections. And I also saw that there was patterns of setting up physical objects to remember events. So that was Jacob's ladder to heaven. There's the rock in the middle of the river when they split it. I forgot which one we read this week in Genesis, but there was one in there.
It was establishing something.
About setting up a rock.
Well, after Noah did. I think Noah made a sacrifice after the flood. Yes. So already, because you've got some experience in Bible reading, you're already joining dots of you know something of the stories that are to come, and you're already noticing those patterns. Like we said last week, Genesis is a book of prophetic patterns. And so you're noticing that. Cool. Yep. And what is there anything that really got you thinking this week? Like I know you've posted 1 or 2 things on the Facebook group already, just stuff that you're interested in, but what just got you the most curious?
I think this week, Job 5:19, from 6 calamities he will rescue you, in 7 no harm will touch you. And I heard that and was immediately thought of some of the Proverbs. I remember the 6 and 7, 16 God hates and detests, this sort of thing, which I found was in Proverbs 6, 16 to 19, and then some in Proverbs 30. And after some research, I found out that was a pretty common Hebrew poetic device, just like alliteration or repetition. It's called the X/X+1 device. And so it's basically some algebra. X is the number 6, 6 plus 1, 6 and 7. And so it just explains progression, climax, and finality by means of numbers. So the numbers are less what means anything, but it's just the fact that it's showing movement and progression. And then my favorite thing was it has been combined in the Bible with the number 1,000, which means that's just a big number. They use it. It's not really 1,000 a lot of the time. It just means big. And so in 1 Samuel 18:7, it talks about how Saul killed thousands, but David killed tens of thousands. Mm-hmm. So they combine these 2 devices to kind of really make a point that Saul was okay, but David was awesome. Mm-hmm. So I think that was really cool to see that combined, like a few different things that I've learned come together to that one verse.
And these are what you were researching was Hebrew literary devices. Yep. So a device is a way of doing something. It's like a tool. Literary means writing. So this is a tool of writing to make some kind of point to the original audience.
And they would have understood at the time that that's what that means. Like that it's creating progression. Like, Yeah, which I don't think I've ever read it to mean that. But it was cool to read that and be like, oh, so that's he's trying to tell us there's progression. So
curiouser and curiouser. Well, I'm glad you're asking questions. Curiosity is an amazing thing, and it will really help you to learn. So dig as deep as you like. And certainly, as we keep reading reading the book of Job, one thing I've noticed this week, finishing off Job, is there are so many questions. Like I think it's like 300 question marks in the book of Job. It is a good thing to ask questions and to get curious. So keep that up. And all right, I'm glad you dug deep.
Thank you.
You want to get going?
Sounds good.
Done. All right. Well, let's hit into our second week of tutorials as we look forward to this coming week of readings. We're continuing, we're finishing off the book of Job, as I just mentioned, so I hope you're enjoying that story, and then we're going to kick back into the book of Genesis, where we're going to read essentially the early stories of Abram. Let's see if I can cover this again before I get too wet. All right, here we go. A couple of thoughts and observations on the book of Job. Last week I spoke a little bit about the nature of the book, that it is largely a work of poetry. It's most likely fiction. It's a dramatisation. Even if Job was a real-life historical figure, if it was a Netflix series, it would come up saying, dramatisation based on real-life events or something like that. Okay, it's certainly written like that. If we were writing it today, we might start the story with "Once upon a time," by that literal thing at the end of the book. Job lives happily ever after. It really has that kind of feel to it, and much like the parables of Jesus, let's say, like the prodigal son story, the main thing of Job is it has one purpose. It has one main message to it, and so we need to look for the moral of the story. Now, exactly what the moral of the story is of the book of Job, well, again, I'm not here, as I said in these tutorials, to pastor you through the implications of the story, all right? So I won't tell you what the moral of the story is. You can work that out for yourself. But what I do know is that there is a Bible lesson in this story, and it's to be very careful to take every text of Scripture in its proper context. You've heard that? A text out of context is a pretext, or is just a con, okay? And one of the things with the book of Job is it's not one of those books that you should just open up, put your finger down and say, well, that's the word of the Lord. Because one of the things we find out in the book of Job is that much of what is said, much of the advice of the friends actually turns out to be false. It turns out to be wrong. And we find that out this week as God comes on the scene, as Elihu, Job's fourth friend, comes on the scene, and they begin to reveal that much of the advice from the first three friends is actually wrong. So just keep that in mind. Every text needs to be taken in context. All right. So the other thing I want you to notice is the structure of the book of Job, and this might help you to as to how to approach the readings. First of all, as I mentioned last week, it begins with a prologue and ends with an epilogue. It begins with a once upon a time, there was this amazing guy called Job, okay, and it ends with a happily ever after. But in between are these big dialogues and monologues of these three friends. They come in three cycles, okay? I think we've read two already. We're about to read the third cycle of those three this week. And then God and Elihu come in on the scene at the end. And what I think would be really helpful for you, I'm certainly not going to do this every week, but about 10 years ago, the guys at the Bible Project became famous for this, really. They started doing comic strip animations to help you understand the structure of book. And the one on Job I'm going to highly recommend. It'll just help you to step back and understand how the structure of Job works. So do that. But for me this week, I'm encouraging you to read the last, unless you do what Jesse did and read the whole thing in 2 hours, all right? My encouragement is to read, finish Job in 2 sittings of 11 chapters each, 21 to 31, and then 32 to 42. I'll put that in the notes so you don't have to remember, but if you do that, it kind of makes sense. And then we're heading back to the book of Genesis, which, as we said last week, is an ancient book, okay, of ancient covenant history, revealing prophetic patterns and themes. We're doing chapters 12 to 20 this week. I insist you do that in one sitting. It'll literally take you 15 minutes. Okay, I read it this week with a coffee. Literally took me 15 minutes. Essentially, we're looking at the age or the stories of Abram and Sarai, who later had their names changed, but not quite yet. And we're entering now into the age of the patriarchs, where God is establishing a covenant family. All right, this is a critical turning point. That's why we're starting here in chapter 12. We're essentially up to now, we've seen the story of God walking with individual men. All right, Enoch, Noah, Adam, okay? But there's no strong indication, maybe it's implied, but there's nothing explicit that says that the faith of those men was passed on to their families after them. Okay, but now God establishes a family, a covenant family that he is dealing with, and he chooses Abram and Sarai to be the mum and dad of that family. So there's two things essentially I want you to take notice of as we read Genesis this week. The first thing is Abram's relationship with Lot. We've got the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, okay, which is a bit of a strange story. It's a little bit strange. You've got angelic messengers coming, fire burning a city, pillars of salt, okay, a few unusual things in there. But the story of Sodom and Gomorrah is actually consistent with some of the things we've seen so far, where the angelic realm or the spiritual realm is very seamlessly interacting with humanity. Okay, so we've seen that in Job, we've seen that in early Genesis. It continues on as we read the Sodom and Gomorrah story. And we also see in that story the developing theme of destruction of a population of people, of a populace. Okay, a destruction of a populace, but the rescue of a remnant out of that. So very much like the story of Noah, okay, destruction of a region or destruction of a populace, but the rescue of a remnant. And one thing that could be an interesting study for you this week is comparing and contrasting Sodom and Gomorrah with the Noah story, and just see what you notice there as to the differences and the distinctives between the two. All right, so pay attention to the story of Lot. The second major thing we see this week, though, is the God's covenant with Abram, and that's essentially twofold. God promises to bless Abram and give him a plot of land for him and his generations to live in. So here we have the promise of a son, the sign to remember the covenant, so that this family will always remember who they were. Doesn't matter where they end up, even if they end up as slaves in Egypt for 400 years, okay? You'll see that mentioned. Even if that happens, this family will have a sign to remember their heritage, to remember who they're from. Their dad is Abraham, and God promised to bless us. So that sign is implemented this week. And biblically, this covenant with Abraham shapes most everything we see in the Bible story now moving forward, where God has a family of people that he is uniquely chosen to bless. All right? They are the children of Abram. So it's a really important part of the whole biblical story, and also a really important part of human history. Really, because up till now in ancient history, the gods, okay, the way that man related to God was really unpredictable. The gods were known to be capricious, which means you could never tell what they were going to do or when they were going to get angry next or whatever. They were really unreliable and unpredictable. Well, Yahweh, as it turns out, or the God of Abram, speaks to him and makes a covenant, which is one of God's way of saying this: you can count on me. I'm making an agreement with you, and you can rely on me to be predictable, to uphold my end of the agreement. So even in human history, this becomes a turning point in ancient religious thought, that God, or the gods, can actually be predictable. And so God establishes that with Abram through what we call a covenant. All right, so a couple of things to take note of there. Hope you enjoy this week's readings. Go for it. Again, my recommendation is you read the next part of Job, finish off Job in 2 sittings, 21 to 31, 32 to 42. You'll see a natural break in there in those 11 chapters each. And then Genesis, you have to read those in one sitting. Bless you guys. I'll see you next week for week 3. Enjoy your readings.